Really Happened radio show for the America First, Second, and Third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, December 6, 2013. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Got a long weekend coming up here of all kinds of craziness, no doubt being planned by our various government and corporate leadership, to use the term loosely here. A lot of stuff to talk about today. Claire will be joining us in the third hour. She may be a few minutes late. She's over at her church on some committee or something, but she's going to be here as close to the top of the hour as possible. So if she's not here bang on the spot of the top of the hour, have no fear. She'll be joining us. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Sam is sitting in our control room today, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. And we got a lot of stuff to talk about today. I want to start off with some headlines. Let's see. This was over in the Daily Mail in Great Britain. Giant ice storm freezes half the U.S. Millions battle snowfall in terrible conditions as temperatures hit minus 40. More headlines. Record low temperatures hit Bay Area. 1,122 record cold temps in the U.S. in 1 week. Snow blanket state brings record cold temperatures. Santa Cruz sees record low temperatures Thursday. Overheated Utah blows away low temperature records. One of the worst ice storms in years continues from Texas to Kentucky. And I mention that because, believe it or not, over at that Mother Jones article that was attempting to say that you should listen to climate scientists and carbon Nazis with their computer models and pay no attention to all the meteorologists who are coming forward to say that this whole global warming thing is nonsense. They're still out there trying to argue that they are correct, and some of their arguments are just, they're nonsense. In fact, the last time I peeked on there, they were pushing this one where, climate and weather isn't the same thing. You can have a warming world and the weather will still be cold. In fact, global warming causes cold weather. So I'll tell you what, take a pan of water, put it on the stove on low heat. When it freezes over, get back to me. I mean, some of the stuff they're saying just absolutely does not make any scientific sense whatsoever. A few weeks ago, they were saying the world has gotten warmer, but the heat is hiding at the bottom of the ocean. It's lurking in the deeps, ready to leap out and roast you if you do not pay your carbon taxes. And, of course, completely flies in the face of the principle of convection, where warm water will rise and cold water will sink. And they're just out there. Global warming causes massive snowstorms. Not what they were saying 10 years ago. 10 years ago, they were all saying, oh, snow will be a thing of the past. They were predicting Greenland was going to lose all of its ice in just 20 years. And it didn't happen. And they're still trying to figure some way they can bamboozle you and swindle you out of carbon taxes and force you to buy carbon credits and just go into another one of these little money-making schemes. Remember, Al Gore set up his carbon trading scam, assisted by Enron's Ken Lay. So the goal of this is to do to planet Earth with carbon dioxide what Enron did to California with electricity, and you remember how bad that was. And there's a lot of money and a lot of reputations on the line, and they're struggling as hard as they can to try and somehow convince you to go on believing them when they say the world is getting warmer. It's all the fault of carbon dioxide, and all the carbon dioxide is the fault of humans. And they're now saying, the EPA has said carbon dioxide is a pollutant. It's a pollutant, and therefore you should pay a pollution tax, which is nonsense. Carbon dioxide is not a pollutant. It exists in nature. Far more carbon dioxide is being put into the atmosphere by this volcano over here yonder, that way, than by all the cars on planet Earth. And they come back and they say, well, carbon dioxide from nature is okay. Carbon dioxide from people is a pollutant. And betrays that attitude that we see in the environmental extremists, that planet Earth and all of its life forms are over here, are part of nature, and these icky-poo humans aren't part of nature. They really do come from that mindset that when beavers build a dam for beavers' purposes, that's okay and that's part of nature, but a dam built by humans for human purposes is not. And it betrays, I think, a high degree of self-hatred in these people. For some reason, whatever, their upbringing, they're on their meds or something like that, they hate themselves and they figure that all humans should hate themselves and just go away and leave planet Earth to be in the balance of nature. And, of course, there is no balance of nature. That's a nice romantic concept, But the reality is that nature is chaos. Nature is change. Nature is careening down the corridors of time, colliding with the walls and tripping over the furniture. And it always has and it always will. But I wanted to put that up there because they're still out there pushing this. And the reason they're pushing this, one of the reasons they're pushing this, besides saving their reputations, because they bet their prestige and reputations the world was going to get warmer, and Mother Nature went, don't think so, is because with Obamacare failing to generate the billions and billions of dollars in new tax revenues this government needs to float itself on a little bit longer, they're going to go back to the carbon tax. And they can't wait until next summer when it actually is warm and they can say, oh, wow, look how warm. Oh, it's global warming. They're having to try and resell global warming as we go into another major, hard, record-setting winters. And as a matter of fact, I'm getting a comment here in the chat room. It was minus 10 degrees Fahrenheit in New Mexico this morning. That is insane, insane cold. All right, now, as I mentioned earlier in the week, we're going to be talking about Pearl Harbor because tomorrow is Pearl Harbor Day, the day that will live in infamy, when we are all taught in school that Japan carried out a sneak attack on Pearl Harbor without any warning, those dastardly Japanese, and we had to go to war against Japan. And as we've come to find out, like so many other excuses for war, it doesn't really withstand close examination. We know they lied about torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin. We know they lied about a Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. We know they lied about the Lusitania not carrying war munitions. And as a matter of fact, they were lying a great deal about Pearl Harbor. Now, yes, Japan did attack Pearl Harbor, but they were goaded into it. Roosevelt was trying to get America to commit to the war in Europe. And in 1940, a lot of Americans still remembered World War I, and they were adamant, we're not going to get sucked into another one of those European conflicts because of all the people who died in that war. And so Roosevelt needed a dirty trick. He needed a back door. And when Japan signed the Axis Agreement with Germany and Italy, Roosevelt said, aha, if I can somehow trick Japan into war with the U.S., that will automatically allow us to say, we're in the war against Nazi Germany. And so over at the Office of Naval Intelligence, there was this gentleman, Arthur H. McCollum, Lieutenant Commander. And he was very familiar with the Japanese culture. He'd had a lot of interaction with Japan when he was growing up. And he crafted a plan of 8 discrete steps, actions the United States could take that wouldn't look all that provocative to the American people, but which would be perceived by the Japanese as horrible insults to their culture based on honor. And Roosevelt, over the course of the early part of 1941, implemented all 8 of those steps and basically placed Japan in a position of having to go into the Dutch East Indies to obtain raw materials they were no longer allowed to buy from the United States. And in order to be able to operate in the Dutch East Indies, Japan had to remove the threat of military intervention by the United States at Pearl Harbor. And you need to remember, prior to Pearl Harbor, the Pacific Fleet wasn't kept in Hawaii because Pearl Harbor was considered indefensible. The fleet was stationed out of San Diego, and one of the provocative acts Roosevelt did was to move the fleet from San Diego to Pearl Harbor. And a lot of the top naval officers at the time said, you can't do that. It's wide open to attack. Why are you putting it out there? You're almost baiting them. Yeah, that's what he was doing. We're going to take a break for commercials here. We'll be back with more about Pearl Harbor after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about Pearl Harbor. Tomorrow's Pearl Harbor Day. There are going to be all kinds of commemorations here on the island of Oahu. Every year, the sadly dwindling number of veterans of that incident gather at the Memorial for the Arizona and get together and shake each other's hands, the Americans and the Japanese, and look at each other and say, how could we have all been so stupid as to fall for this? And as we look back on that, we begin to realize it was just another staged, managed event to motivate the public to go along with an already decided agenda for war. And we're talking about all the evidence of foreknowledge. Now, the story you got from TV and movies and your public school was that Japanese sailed all the way across the Pacific maintaining radio silence, and there was no way the U.S. could know they were coming. And that is absolutely, provably false for a couple of reasons. Here in Hawaii, our main shipping line is the Matson shipping line, and back in 1941, this being the age before jet passenger airplanes took over the tourist part of the economy, the Matson Steamship Company operated a passenger ship, the Lure Line. And the Lure Line was on its way from San Francisco to Honolulu Harbor, and on board the Lure Line was a radio operator named Leslie Grogan. And Leslie Grogan was hearing the Japanese fleet. And the reason that he could do it, and it's been confirmed, radio intelligence listening posts around the Pacific, we'll talk about one of those in a little bit, they were all picking it up, is because the transmitters in Japan sending out instructions to the fleet could be heard by the large battleships and carriers in the fleet that had the room for the large antennas, but they had to retransmit the orders to the smaller ships around them, including ships that were racing to catch up. There was one fueling ship that was broadcasting where it was and where it was going without even bothering to encrypt it. And Leslie Grogan was able to plot on a map in his logbook, for the radio log, for the Lure Line, where the fleet was and where it was going day after day after day as the Lure Line came into Honolulu Harbor. And the Lure Line pulled into Honolulu Harbor on December 4th, 1941, 3 days before the attack. And Leslie Grogan contacted the Pearl Harbor Office of Naval Intelligence, and he turned over all of his logbooks and everything to them. Now, in the Naval Archives, there is a record of the logbook having been there, but the logbook itself, of course, long ago vanished. Now, regarding the radio intercept stations, many years ago I made a video, and it's on the front page of whatreallyhappened.com, called The Bones of Station H. And in 1941, the United States maintained a radio listening post over on the windward side of Oahu. It's in an area that's now Haia State Park. And it was intercepting radio messages on the shortwave bands from all over the Pacific. This is before communication satellites, where everybody had to bounce their signals off the ionosphere, and anybody in that hemisphere with the antennas could pick the messages up. And it has surfaced since then that on November 25th, Station H intercepted Admiral Yamamoto's order to the fleet to sail into Hawaiian waters and be prepared to strike. Now, that message was taken from Station H and driven over to Station Hypo, which was a decryption center in Pearl Harbor. And it was decoded because it's now been confirmed the U.S. had broken the Japanese Naval Code years before Pearl Harbor actually happened. And the message was then forwarded on to Roosevelt at the White House, but under orders from Roosevelt, the message was not copied to Hawaii's commanders, Admiral Kimmel and General Short. They were intentionally kept in the dark about what was going on. And so the attack was coming in, and there were all these indicators. In fact, the Army Board review of Pearl Harbor in 1944 concluded everything the Japanese were planning to do was known to the United States. In August of 1941, a British double agent, Dusko Popov, codenamed Tricycle, handed the entire plan for the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor to the FBI. And they dismissed it and said, oh, it's too complete, it's too good. We think it's a fake. We're not going to pay any attention to this. Or at least that's what they told Tricycle. Roosevelt wanted the attack. He needed the attack. He needed Japan to make the first overt move in order to enrage America into supporting the war agenda. So the remains of that listening station here on Oahu are actually still there. And we documented them. If you go over to High State Park, the concrete foundations of the radio intercept station and the concrete foundations for 2 of the 3 antenna towers are still visible. And they're still there. Now, even the BBC did a documentary called Sacrifice at Pearl Harbor, in which they go in and look at all the evidence that the United States government, specifically Franklin Roosevelt, not only knew the Japanese were coming to attack Pearl Harbor, but they withheld it from the Japanese commanders because Roosevelt needed it to look like a surprise attack. And they sent all the modern aircraft carriers and their modern escorts out to sea to the south, well away from the reach of the Japanese. What was left here in Pearl Harbor was essentially older ships that were sort of at the end of their useful life. In fact, the Arizona's sister ship, the USS Utah, had already been pulled from combat status and was being used for training. It wasn't even combat worthy. Basically, they left a bunch of junk in Pearl Harbor to get bombed, along, of course, with all those innocent sailors and other personnel who were killed in the attack, to get the requisite bloody shirts to enrage America into the war. Now, a few months ago, we had a story about a gentleman named Dan Vanderdat, who wrote in The Guardian that Captain Eric Nave died at the age of 94, nice life, and turned out he was the guy who broke the Japanese naval code 2 years before the attack on Pearl Harbor. So there is no question that U.S. cryptographers and British cryptographers knew the attack was coming. In all the material about Pearl Harbor, which most of it was declassified in 1994 and used as source material for Commander Robert B. Stinnett's book, Day of Deceit, there is one message that is still classified to this very day, and that is Winston Churchill's communication to Roosevelt on November 26th. I think we can guess what is in there that would simply blow the lid off this idea that somehow this was a surprise attack, because it wasn't. And now, in this age of Saddam's non-existent nuclear weapons, Assad's non-existent chemical weapon attack on his own people, we understand that all wars are started with lies, fraud, and deception, whether it's the Gleiwitz attack, burning of the Reichstag, torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin. We know wars are started with lies and deception because usually the real reasons for the wars are something the people are not going to go along with. Propping up the dollar, forcing a nation back onto private central banking. And we look back at all of the obvious evidence that Pearl Harbor was a concocted hoax to trick Americans into war by goading the Japanese into an attack and then portraying that attack as a completely unexpected surprise. I'm going to take a break for some commercials. We will be right back. America, welcome back to the show. We're going to go to the phones here now. Jeffrey in North Carolina. Aloha, Jeffrey. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I was thinking about the ACA Act. A lot of the situation where they're saying they're correcting the website because of October 1st. And it seems to me, I've heard a lot of things. I listen to your radio show, and I listen to Alex Jones and a lot of other radio shows that speak about it. And it seems like it's mostly it wasn't meant to work by what people saying. It wasn't meant to work, but it was meant to rip people off. It doesn't have a security system and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I just like to say that, I don't know, people don't believe in visions, and I much less think of them as more like a more pronounced type of dream that's showing you something, but you don't really have any idea. And I saw something that looked like a bunch of business guys that had suits on, and they were about around the pit, and a guy was standing over the pit. And they were just like being thrown into the pit, being consumed. But I noticed the individual that looked like pretty much like the president we have with today. And then I'm thinking, well, if this is a crash and burn website, this would be the perfect thing. But also, too, I have like a prediction There's two of them, if I can say them and get them on the air.
Well,
You know,
okay, but make them brief.
Okay. Well, it's not very long. I hear people say that the future of America may be over in 10 or 12 years. I'll give it a 2-year.
Mm-hmm.
2014 and then 2015, I believe it will be all over with. The second vision that would probably say that if America wants to recover from anything and wants to do anything right now, they would either have to stand up to this. I know people say, well, we don't want to use violence, but if they have a chance to do it against us, then, you know, the revolution that happened in the past, they were willing to die for it. I mean, if America is not willing to die for their future, for their kids, what other choice could you have but 2 years left in this country?
Well, first of all, with regard to your first prediction, I think a lot of people are thinking exactly the same thing, and we could see the collapse happen literally at any time with all the new emerging scandals, the financial shenanigans that are coming out. We're seeing the plunge protection team do their traditional Friday massaging the stock market to a happy ending, supposedly on gloriously wonderful job reports, which are really just based on Christmas holiday shopping season hiring. But as far as the second part of it, the reason to avoid some kind of a violent confrontation with the federal government is that is what the federal government would like to have happen. They're prepared to deal with that. They've been buying guns and hollow point ammunition and armored cars. They are prepared to put down an armed rebellion in this country, which is why that is absolutely the very last thing that we should be considering at this point. Only a fool fights the war the opposition is prepared to fight and win. What I think is going to happen is we're going to see the United States come crashing down the way the former Soviet Union did, and at that point Americans need to be prepared and ready to stand up and say, we will decide the future course of this nation. And that we keep talking about the blueprint for the new America, and I'm trying to get that finished up so we can get that out there for people to look at. And we basically need to stand up and say we're going to go back to most of what's in the Constitution and the first 13 amendments. You know, we got obviously in this electronic age we can get rid of the Electoral College. We can look at direct participatory democracy for the major decisions of the nation, such as using taxpayer money to bail out banks and going off to war. And obviously the most important thing that we need to do when we stand up and decide for ourselves what the new country is going to be is no more private central banks issuing the public currencies alone at interest, because that is a recipe for eventual national suicide, and it has happened in every single nation that has had such a banking system. So, again, I think a lot of people who are out here in the independent media, who are out there speaking truth to power, they are willing to die to save the future of this country. They're risking their lives, risking their careers, certainly risking any kind of a semblance of a material success by getting out there and saying this nation is headed in a bad direction. And there have been some people, like Michael Hastings, who've paid that final price. So don't confuse the lack of violence with an unwillingness to risk one's life for the future of this nation, okay?
Okay.
All right, and thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. And moving on here, I have to tip my hat a little bit here at Jon Stewart. For a while, I was sort of blowing lukewarm on him. He seemed to be complying with certain invisible lines that the corporate media says thou shalt not cross. But over this last week, I've noticed both Jon Stewart and The Daily Show and the Colbert Report displaying a lot more courage and a willingness to go after some of our society's sacred cows, meaning corporate leadership and vested political power. And Jon Stewart on his Wednesday show was just hitting it out of the ballpark. He did a segment on the difference between corporations and people, went on to talk about this Blackstone credit default swap swindle, which is clearly dishonest and yet under the current laws of the United States was legal for them to do. Now, for those of you who haven't picked up on it, Blackstone took out a credit default swap regarding money owned by a European gambling corporation to a third party. That's one of the problems with credit default swaps. Under regular insurance, you can insure your own home against a fire, but you're not allowed to insure your neighbor's house against fire. because you're going to go over there at night with a can of gasoline and a flare and burn the place down to make some money. And that's what Blackstone did here. Blackstone offered to loan this gambling company $100 million on the condition that it default on its loan to the other creditor, which triggered the default swap, and Brookstone made something like $15 million over this defaulting of a loan that Brookstone was neither the borrower nor the lender. And this is one of the ways these credit default swaps get abused. It's one of the reasons we had this disaster in 2008. And it's clearly dishonest and unethical, but right now it happens to be legal here. So John Stewart correctly pointed out the corporate media isn't reporting on these things. Oh, it's all car crash and celebrity news and how to repel like Santa Claus, and Santa's sleigh is accompanied by F-18s on the military simulation. We're being commoditized here as more and more of this very obvious corporate piracy is revealed. And so the shows are definitely worth watching now. I'm sure probably most of you are watching them anyway, but I just noticed in the last week they just seem willing to go a lot closer to that edge, and so I have to applaud and say, well done over there. Now again, getting back to the economy, the stock market is up. It's doing very well. We're having our end of the year, or rather end of the week massage for the happy ending. And let me see. Look at the current numbers here right now. It's back up. The Dow's back up over 16,000. Got to keep it up at that number here. And supposedly it is because the U.S. unemployment rate hits a 5-year low. A lot of people found jobs in November. Huzzah, huzzah, the economy is on the mend. No, it isn't. We're in the holiday shopping season, and retail hires a lot of temporary seasonal retail help to deal with the holiday shopping surge, which isn't surging as much as they were hoping. And all those jobs are going to vanish in January. Now, as far as the claim that the unemployment rate has hit a 5-year low, that is completely unsupported, because we know this government has been manipulating the jobless rate. We know the real unemployment rate is closer to 40%. And the government says, oh, it's down here, 7%, 8%, through arbitrary definitions of what constitutes a job, what constitutes loss of a job, and simply declaring that those people who have been out of work for so long, they no longer qualify for any kind of unemployment benefits. They're simply dropped off the list completely and not counted as unemployed, even though clearly they are without employment. So this idea that things are getting better, you should go on out and start shopping at the mall, it's just more government propaganda. Now, when we come back from this upcoming commercial break, we're going to be talking about the saber rattling that we're seeing with China, comments that we are continuing to hear from Washington, D.C. about how China is a dire mortal threat to the United States in the context of the yuan's growing displacement of the U.S. dollar in international trade. And we're seeing already the signs that the U.S. is seriously moving forward, trying to provoke China into a war and make it look like it's China's fault. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And over on Fox News, they're running a story about how athletes, high school athletes in particular, when they play their sports at higher altitudes, they are less likely to suffer concussions. And I'm sure that's important to the athletes here, but I'm feeling like we're being conditized again, and that's a red warning sign here. We're going to grab a phone call before we get on to the subject of China. Rick in Florida. Aloha, Rick. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today? Rick, are you there? Well, I guess not. I must have... Boy, that was fast. Anyway, getting on to China. Now, we have been seeing a flood of corporate media propaganda trying to bash China, demonize China. They're bad, they're evil, they're oppressing their people, they're full of al-Qaeda, they have weapons of mass destruction. That last one is true, and you should keep that in mind. And Joe Biden has come out declaring the United States does not recognize China's air defense zone over the disputed Sakhalin Islands. Now remember, back in 2008, Japan and China were in peaceful negotiation to develop and share the resources in that area. They were going to do it peacefully. Yeah, there's enough for everybody. You have some, we'll pay half the development, you pay half the development. We'll all do very well. And then all of a sudden the United States starts meddling and telling Japan, no, those are all yours. We recognize those islands are yours. And just starts ratcheting up the tension, sending in military forces to the area, sailing warships off the Chinese coast, which, by the way, was one of the 8 steps in Arthur H. McCollum's plan to provoke Japan into attacking the United States, was parading U.S. warships right off the coast of Japan, which was a serious diplomatic insult to the emperor. And now they're doing it again with China. So China declared this air defense zone over the Sakhalin Islands. The U.S. promptly flew a couple of B-52s through there to rattle the sabers. China has warships in the area. The U.S. has warships in the area. They're trying to ratchet up some kind of an incident. What the U.S. wants is a war with China and to somehow make it look like China's fault. Because the real goal, the real agenda behind all the coming bloodshed and possible nuclear conflict is to stop the yuan from displacing the U.S. dollar as the international trade and reserve currency. Even though the yuan is a very strong, dependable currency backed up by a very strong manufacturing economy, and the U.S. dollar is this overinflated piece of paper that is not backed up by anything but future tax earnings of Americans who can no longer pay those taxes because all of the manufacturing jobs they used to use to pay taxes are gone. If the U.S. can get a war with China going, the U.S. can diplomatically tell the rest of the U.S. allies, don't do business with China anymore. The U.S. can write off all that debt owed to China and just say, we don't have to pay that off to you. We're at war with you now. We're going to balance the books, with a war here. We're going to erase all that red ink on the trade imbalance with the red blood of our soldiers. And that's really what's going on. All right, we're going to go back to the phones. Rick in Florida, I guess we regained our connection. Rick, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. It seems so strange to me that they would be taking, China to the bullpen to try to get them into a fight when they rely on China to buy our treasury bills, our debt, and everything else.
Well, China stopped doing that. China has stopped doing that.
That's what it is then.
Yeah.
That's what it is. All they have to do is take the Iraqi dinar, put it on the Forex, peg it to the dollar, and they can keep this fraud going for another decade. But they're so myopic in what they want to do. They're so hell bent on getting involved in World War III. It's breathtaking.
Well, see, the thing is, in Iraq, they're trying to basically phase out Iraq's dinar, and certainly in terms of the oil industry in Iraq, the oil is being traded for the U.S. dollar. That's that whole petrodollar deal, to make sure that the world's resource-rich areas only sell their resources for the U.S. dollar, so that anybody who wants to buy those resources has to come to the United States of America and either borrow at interest U.S. dollars from the Federal Reserve or trade real manufactured goods and real agricultural produce to get dollars to go buy the resources. And, of course, that increases the price of those resources to those nations because the U.S. has taken a huge piece of the action. And that's really what's going on. And when we hear all this talk coming out of Washington about how China is a mortal threat to the United States, they're not talking about China actually coming over here and killing us in our beds, although I'm sure that'll be part of the imagery the propaganda will resort to. They're talking about the fact that that China has a very powerful, functioning manufacturing economy. They're the best manufacturers in the world right now. And people who trade in the yuan know that they can go to China with the yuan and actually get something of value in exchange for it. And China has signed 8 treaties with other nations for direct currency swaps without going through the U.S. dollar. And more countries are turning to the yuan. The yuan has now gone past the euro in terms of international trade, and it's now in second place behind the dollar and closing rapidly. And that's why there's this rush to try and get some kind of hostility with China. So the U.S. can say, don't you do business with China. They're our enemy now. We're at war. Don't you use the yuan. We will loan you plenty of dollars so you can go on conducting your commerce.
it seems to be some of the parallels of like the fall of Rome Part 2. And since we're talking about the fall of Rome since we're speaking about the fall of Rome Part 2, my phone has been blowing up over something domestically that's going on right now. You've been made aware that President Obama has ordered all the U.S. flags to get half-staff for Nelson Mandela?
It's probably going to confuse a lot of people because they also ordered the flags to half-staff for Pearl Harbor. Does that mean they're going to run them all the way down to the ground?
Right. I didn't know Nelson Mandela was a U.S. citizen or a serviceman or a statesman, and I thought he belonged to the ANC, which
I don't really have a problem with that. I mean, he's certainly one of the major figures, an icon, good, bad, or indifferent. He had an influence on the world, and I don't have a problem with lowering the flags to half-staff for Nelson Mandela. I really don't. Okay?
I know later on, I understand that, but initially, I mean, ANC, communist affiliation, you know, the bombs going off in restaurants and...
Well, I mean, you know, President Obama's real father, Frank Marshall, was an avowed communist. I mean, you know, that was then, this is now. And I get tired of people throwing around the word communist as if we're still, you know, in the glory days of the Cold War in the 1950s and 1960s where they just have to say the word communist and we'll soil ourselves. Those days are gone.
That's true.
Okay.
Right, that's absolutely true. Well, Michael, I wish you the best. I'm so glad you're back.
I'm glad to be back as well. Thank you for the phone call. I'm going to switch over to John in Barbados. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Yeah. Just talking about the yuan or the renminbi and the dollar.
Okay, John, are you on a speakerphone because I can barely understand you, or have you been into that Monday rum a little too much?
Maybe I should have written closer to the microphone.
I cannot.
Is that better?
It's a little better, yeah. How's that?
Yeah. Okay, we're in the war is jumping ship.
Actually, it isn't better. John, I cannot hear you. Hang up and try and call back again and see if you can connect because I really cannot understand what you're saying, and I'm sorry. You know, wonderful technology here in the 21st century. It's also value engineered. It just is not going to work here. Now then, speaking of Nelson Mandela, and everyone's going on, you know, about, oh, he spent all those years and, you know, 27 years imprisoned on Robben Island and what a terrible abuse it was. And it's a little hypocritical for the U.S. to be eulogizing him now and admittedly for lowering the flags to half-mast because, as it turns out, it was the Central Intelligence Agency that arranged for Nelson Mandela's 1962 arrest. They had infiltrated an agent into the ANC's inner circle who basically did the Judas Iscariot number on Mandela and said, there he is, go get him, and they arrested him. Playing both sides. It's amazing stuff. Now, getting over to Israel and Palestine. Oh, there's the music. We've got to take a break for Phyllis Shapley and news stories, and we'll be back with all kinds of other stuff in hour number 2 of our program. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, hour number 2. And John in Barbados called back. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Yeah. Talking about the renminbi and the world currency, a dollar, and what have you. I think the Allies are jumping ship already. For example, London has opened a bank where you can exchange pounds or other currencies directly for renminbi without going through the dollar.
Yes.
A similar bank has been opened in China so that the Chinese can exchange their renminbi for pounds. So this de-Americanization or de-dollarization of the world seems to be moving ahead of pace.
Oh, and it is, and it's, you know, more countries are dropping away from the dollar faster than the U.S. can conquer them, and I think that's why they decided they have to go to the head of the problem, which is China and its economic might.
The other point I wanted to make is that the Joint Chief of Staff, the chairman, Martin Dempsey, has started a Facebook page. And I sent him a few choice words. I won't repeat them here. They're not too polite. However, you know, if America wants to improve its image, it's certainly got to start reducing its night raids in Afghanistan, where the dumb, stupid animals go in and shoot women and children in their beds. 40 of those night raids every night. No wonder Hamid Karzai is complaining.
Yeah, and of course that's an insult to the United States, because the United States put Hamid Karzai in charge, and Hamid Karzai wasn't quite the obedient puppet the U.S. was hoping. They're still trying to arm twist him into a security agreement that will allow the U.S. to stay there. But Hamid Karzai is going to say, look, I'm out of this job here in another month, and you're going to have to talk to the next incoming government, which is not looking to be all that sympathetic and friendly to the United States right now. So the reality is that a lot of these already existing wars and invasions and overthrows are not really working all that smoothly. And this whole war agenda has already badly stumbled, which increases the risk of...
The American military rampaging right around the world is totally ridiculous. And I would be most reluctant to see a world war between China and America, bringing in loads of other nations, for the simple reason China's new submarine fleet is quite effective. And I would hate to see the San Diego and Dogwood Canyon nuclear power plants blown to pieces and spread that lovely radiation all the way across North America.
And that is a very real risk. The United States does not have the manpower to physically invade the Chinese mainland. China has the manpower, but they don't have the transports to physically invade North America. The United States is already militarily and economically exhausted from over 10 years of war on, list of names here, and lacks the resources. It lacks the 3 M's, the manufacturing, the money, and the manpower to prevail against Russia and or China in a conventional war. And that means if they take that step across that threshold, somewhere between that point and final capitulation by the United States government, they will start turning those little brass keys in the missile silos. And remember, the launch code for all the American missiles is 000000, and it'll be a bad day for anybody not wearing 2 million sunblock. And that's why this is so dangerous, and we all have to stand up and say, no, this has gone on long enough. You took the chance, you dared to gamble that you could force the world back to Bretton Woods and the petrodollar, and you lost. It's time to call it quits and accept those losses before you incinerate the entire surface of planet Earth over a piece of ink and paper.
Well, I'm hoping wiser counsel will prevail in Washington, D.C., but who knows? These people are totally crazy up there.
Well, they've got their bunkers. They figure if they mess up, they'll just stay underground for a couple of years and come back up to a much less crowded planet Earth. The fact of the matter is, from what we're hearing, wiser counsels are being kicked out, not just of the White House and the Congress, but the military as well. Military officers who are not willing to just blindly follow the orders of His Highnessness in the White House are being asked to leave. They're being forced out with what appear to be trumped-up charges of very minor infractions that we know are rampant and commonplace throughout the military. And so the White House doesn't want to hear anybody saying that this is not going to work out. Just like the White House didn't want to hear anybody who was saying, look, that Obamacare website's not going to work, and you should not go forward with it. And Obama did, and it betrays a great deal of recklessness on his person. This is a man who will go ahead with starting a war with Russia and China, convinced in his heart of hearts the U.S. will prevail, just as he was convinced the Obamacare website was going to work. And that's why this is so dangerous right now.
Well, he seems to be getting rid of all his top military officers who oppose various schemes, including martial laws. Up to 200 now, I believe, is the score.
Yes.
Senior military officers dismissed.
It's the purge. It's the purge. And the Nazis did exactly the same to the German military before they made their move. They got rid of anybody who would stand up and say, look, this isn't going to work. And so
it's beginning to look more like a Stalin purge.
It'll be a Stalin purge when they start grabbing ordinary citizens and making them disappear.
Well, they have it already in the pipeline. It's called the NDAA.
Well, the NDAA's already established law, and they claim to have the authority, but so far they're not actually doing it. When they step over that line, of course, we're going to know that we're into some really, really bad times here. And again, the end result of all of this inevitably is going to be a for real nuclear war.
Well, I find it rather sad that America has descended to this level. It used to be.
It's like watching a loved one withering away from a wasting disease, and you can't do anything about it, and you just have to look and watch as it goes on. It's been a painful process for a lot of Americans.
I mean, when I was in the Air Force, we used to exchange visits with the U.S. Air Force. This was in the 60s, and it's a totally different place to what I remember.
Yeah, it is. This is not the nation we were taught that we lived in, and maybe it really never was, but now we all realize it. We realize what a terrible, terrible government we have. We have descended into outright economic and political fascism. And unfortunately, they're seeing a major war as their only way out of this mess they've created with the economy and the private central banks.
I have a minor sort of disagreement there. It's not a terrible government. It's a series of terrible governments, both in the UK and in America.
Well, that's another way of looking at it, except that, the people in Congress and the people in the White House are rotating figureheads, but the attitude problems, the systemic problems that got us into this position are basically hardwired into the government structure and system itself. And
it just amazes me that people like John McCain can remain in the Senate.
Well, that's what Diebold is for. We guarantee the results, and we know the elections in this country are absolutely fraudulent. And again, we all got this very harsh lesson looking at Ron Paul in 2008 and 2012. He had tons of grassroots support, and the corporate media and the political system absolutely were not going to let him in, by hook or by crook, mostly by crook.
Well, it's amazing to me as well that the Diebold machines and NCR machines in the banks are accurate to the cent, to the absolute cent. I mean, it would be easy to set up a direct elected system using those very banking machines that can't be fiddled.
Well, you're absolutely right, and that's why we have to conclude that all of those flaws and backdoors in the voting machines are there by design. Got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, John. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show, and some of that lovely Christmas music written and performed by my lovely wife, Claire, who will be with us shortly. And this may be a good time for our Dear Santa Claus letter. Dear Santa Claus, we've all been really good boys and girls over here at Republic Broadcasting. And this year for Christmas, what we need is the means to go on being good little boys and girls. Because we don't get millions of dollars from the Obamacare people to tell everybody what a wonderful thing it is and how they should overlook all the failings of the website and just go on and throw their money into those health insurance companies who will then share a piece of the action with the government. We don't get lots and lots of money from big pharmaceutical companies to tell you that their new wonder drug is a wonder. And you should pay no attention to all those people who seem to be reacting to it rather badly, including shooting up schools. Don't get a lot of money from the oil and gas companies to tell you that fracking is 100% safe. Don't get money from the nuclear industry to tell you that really nuclear power is completely 100% safe, and you shouldn't be worried about all that radioactive waste. So, dear Santa, what we need here at Republic Broadcasting is the support to continue being the People's Radio Network. And, of course, when I talk about Santa Claus, I'm actually directing this at you, the listener, because it is our end-of-the-year fundraising drive. And we need the money. It just comes down to that because we don't get funding from government. We don't get funding from large corporations. We don't get funding from shadowy non-governmental organizations with concealed agendas who will tell us what we can and, more importantly, what we cannot tell you. One of the strengths of Republic Broadcasting is in all the time that I have been here, nobody has ever once said, don't report this story. And you're not going to get that on that certain other network which is well-funded and respects certain lines, shall we say. So we're having our end-of-the-year fundraiser, and the number to call to pledge is 800-724-2719. That's 800-724-2719. That's a different number than our call-in line for being here on the show. One more time, 800-724-2719. And if you will pledge $100 or more, you will get a Republic Broadcasting T-shirt and a Republic Broadcasting coffee mug to put out there on display in your home and brag and say, look what I have. I am a supporter of the People's Radio Network and of getting the truth out to keep the public informed so they may make good choices. One more time, I hope you have your pencils in hand, 800-724-2719. Remember that number. There will be a pop quiz next class. Now, getting back over to the Middle East, the Palestinian negotiator, realizing that Israel is not negotiating in good faith to come up with a two-state solution in Israel and Palestine, is now calling on a summit of the great powers to sort this mess out, to hold Israel to the resolutions by the United Nations, to demand that Israel actually finally, after all these years, draw their borders and agree to live within them. Hamas has come out and said that the Palestinian Authority, whom Israel has deemed to be the government of Palestine, despite the results of the election, is making too many concessions, giving away too much, and the Palestinian people are not obligated to abide by any agreement the Palestinian Authority comes up, certainly within Gaza, where Hamas won those elections, whereupon the U.S. disregarded the elections, Israel disregarded the elections, and started bombing and shooting up the place. Now then, interesting little stories. You're probably aware a few days ago, France announced that their research had confirmed Yasser Arafat did not die of radiation poisoning. Now, it's come out that the reason France, which wasn't even really involved with this new investigation, they basically came out and said Israel did not assassinate Yasser Arafat. The Swiss research onto the polonium was flawed. Now, the French report is saying that Yasser Arafat died of a serious wasting disease. Well, since he died in a French hospital, why didn't the French doctors catch that, know what the disease was, and treat it? And it turns out the entire argument the French are putting forward to try and get Israel off the hook for the assassination is a suggestion that Arafat's remains were contaminated with radium gas, which is produced naturally in the earth, and it comes up through the ground. It can be a problem for people with enclosed basements that aren't ventilated because it will accumulate, and it is radioactive. And they said, well, we assume that the Swiss results for polonium were actually radium, and therefore we declare Arafat was not assassinated, Israel is innocent, mahi dictum est sine die. Now, the Swiss scientists have come back and said, you have no basis for making that claim because we exhumed other bodies from the same location as a control, and they are not showing the same radiation. Therefore, it can't be radium, which presumably would contaminate everything equally. And so more and more we are seeing that France is not a bastion of truth and accuracy, but is simply kowtowing to political pressure from Israel, just as they kowtowed to political pressure from Monsanto in trying to suppress that French research report on GMO corn, glyphosate, and rats. We live in a world in which the rich and powerful have decided they have the authority to decide for us what is true and what is false. They want to sell you their truth and convince you it is the truth. And that's what propaganda does. Truth is the property of all people equally. And in this age of lies that we find ourselves ensconced in, we must all be our own best analysts to look at as much of the raw information and facts as we can and decide for ourselves We have to stop allowing the government to decide for us what we're going to think about something, whether it's Arafat's assassination, GMO foods, what really happened on 9/11, whether or not Assad is gassing his own Alawite supporters, whether Saddam had nuclear weapons or not. That's why it's a waste of time to scream, we need another investigation. Oh, a new investigation is just another opportunity for the government to polish the lies. I don't need another investigation. I've concluded what happened on 9/11 with Arafat, with the GMO, and so should you. And just say, I have decided, I have concluded, I've made up my own mind, and I don't need anybody's permission to trust my own conclusions about what is going on. Now then, very quickly getting over to the TSA, everybody's most hated agency these days, even ahead of the Internal Revenue Service. They got to be thinking, we're number 2, we got to try harder. Apparently, more and more airports are now installing what are called these detention pods. Now, these are enclosed spaces that hold you as you get off the airplane. That's what's so absurd about this. You've already gone through the crotch-groping, laptop-dropping security check to get on the airplane, and now, in order to justify more budgets and more spending and more money and enrich more and more of the people who are in this security industrial complex, the TSA is putting up these detention pods so that when you get off the plane, you have to go through some kind of another security check, which is completely redundant and superfluous. What do you think happened? We formed a terror plot at 35,000 feet. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the TSA, the Tourism Suppression Agency. They certainly have done that here in Hawaii. You'll always see the tourism board saying, oh, we have an 80% occupancy in our hotels, and what they're not telling you is how many hotels and resorts have gone completely out of business. Especially along the leeward side of Oahu. It's like a ghost town there, except for the Disney Resort. They're still doing very well. But we're talking about the TSA, and we're talking about Department of Homeland Security and the no-fly list. And there's a very interesting story regarding this Stanford University student who back in 2006 was trying to fly to a conference having to do with her education and was told she was on the no-fly list and was not allowed to travel. And then she attempted to travel again. This was over to Malaysia. They waived the no-fly list. Apparently, they have the authority to do that. Put her on the plane. She went over, did her little conference and her educational stuff, tried to fly back to the United States of America, and was told the no-fly list was going to prevent her from returning to the United States where she'd been living and studying. The Department of Homeland Security apparently asked the Malaysian authorities to arrest her. They did not. And so she's been stuck in Malaysia since 2006 fighting a legal action over why she was on the list, why there is no mechanism for somebody to get their name off the list. And it's finally going to court. The district court in San Francisco is preparing to hear the case. Now, because she is in Malaysia and the Department of Homeland Security will not allow her onto a U.S. flight, she can't come to testify. So they decided to bring her daughter as a witness for all that had been done to this woman. And the daughter goes to the airport and finds that all of a sudden she's on the no-fly list and can't fly to San Francisco to be a witness in this case against the Department of Homeland Security. How does this have anything to do with the so-called war on terror? This is clearly arbitrary. This is clearly the Department of Homeland Security abusing the no-fly list to protect themselves from going to court over abusing the no-fly list. The Department of Homeland Security has ruined countless lives, countless careers, by arbitrarily saying you may not fly on an airplane because we don't like you. We have absolutely no evidence that you're engaged in any criminal activity or any terror threat against the United States of America. We just don't like your name. We don't like how you dress. We don't like your religion. Now, 2 days ago, we were reporting on this story about how people dressed up as police officers had been committing robberies, in one case a rape. And there was a big stink about this happening in Detroit. Men were impersonating police officers, robbing people. Well, somebody got a picture of one of the robberies and identified the perpetrators and discovered they're actual Detroit police officers. One was a sergeant and a 20-year veteran with the Detroit Police Department. When they went off duty, they would simply find some people and rob them at gunpoint. Now, since 9/11, the police in the United States of America have murdered 8 times as many innocent Americans as have been killed by terrorists, and that's including the large block in that pseudo-terrorist attack on the World Trade Towers. And now we find out the police aren't stopping crimes because they're too busy committing the crimes. And that may be a reason why so many of them want your guns, because the United States Supreme Court ruled in John Bad Elk versus United States that if the police are committing an illegal act, citizens have a right to defend themselves from those police up to and including the use of lethal force. Had another story coming out of Michigan about how police responded to a complaint about a barking dog and responded by shooting the dog. Now, we know from that study down in Florida that the police forces are much heavier users of prescription psychiatric medications than the average American citizen. All across America, roughly 22% of Americans are on some form of SSRI or other prescription psychiatric medication to deal with all these made-up diseases that they made up simply to sell us the pills. And the police are taking more of them. Plus, they're being trained by all these Israeli security companies. And this is the result. This is absolutely the result. Now, there's another story. This was over at Reason.com. Another story coming out of Kansas City, Missouri, where police came to this guy's door looking for parole violators. And the homeowner said, Fourth Amendment, if you have a warrant, I will allow you in to conduct your reasonable search. And the cop said, we don't have a warrant, and if you make us go back and get one, we will shoot and kill your dogs. Now, supposedly the police department got some criminal justice professor at some college to say the police actions may not be illegal, even though they may appear awkward. Awkward is not the word. Use of threats to coerce somebody is defined as an act of terrorism under the USA Patriot Act. The police are clearly acting outside the law, first of all, in demanding a search without a warrant, and second of all, with threatening to shoot the guy's dogs if he didn't go along with their illegal activity. Things are getting really bad here, and the police are not your friends. And we don't know what the gun grabbers say. Oh, you don't need guns. You don't need crossbows. You don't need swords. Whatever's going, call the police. They will come and protect you. No, they won't. They'll probably join in with the looting. Another very alarming story coming out from the gun grabbers. This is over at shtfplan.com, and you can figure out what that really stands for. And apparently, an article authored by Lieutenant Colonel Robert Bateman is simply coming on out saying, yeah, we will pry your gun from your cold, dead fingers. And we know that a lot of the military officers that are being purged from the U.S. Armed Forces are those who are Second Amendment supporters. The U.S. government is clearly getting ready to declare war on the American people and on the 50 states. We have to fight for the restoration of our republic by going outside that box they've prepared to trap us in. As I was telling that other caller, only a fool is going to fight the war the government is already prepared to fight and win. They want some kind of an uprising. They've been trying to trip one off here. Last July 4th, Adam Kokesh, armed, march into Washington, come join me. And, of course, that one fell apart. And then with the Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman case, where the whole week before the verdict came out and the corporate media was just selling the idea. There are going to be race riots when Zimmerman's acquitted. There'll be race riots all across America. And that didn't happen because the black community and the white community realized that's what the government wanted, to declare a national emergency. They tried to do it again with this knockout game and tried to give it a racial overtone called polar bear hunting, where blacks are just assaulting whites at random. And it didn't really play out all that well. And Abby Martin's come out with a really good video report saying it's all a made-up crisis. They're trying to find some way to sell the idea there's some kind of a crisis inside the United States of America justifying a state of emergency and a government crackdown. And I know a lot of people are saying, well, if there's a financial crash, that will qualify. Yes, it will. But when there's a financial crash, the American people are going to realize the government caused it to happen. It's the government's fault. Now, it's one thing for the American people to go along with the declaration of a national emergency and suspension of civil rights because of some terrorist threat or race riots or something like that. But when the crisis is of the government's own fault, nobody's going to go along with that. The attitude is going to be, look, you made this mess. Don't come over here and pound on my door and say surrender your guns and your silver and your gold here to fix a problem you had no business allowing to happen in the first place. Speaking of the military, we've got all these officers being ejected for all kinds of minor infractions. Apparently down at Fort Hood, some of the officers have been pimping out the female soldiers to raise a little money with prostitution. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And another story just came here. Apparently in Washington, D.C., they've just arrested a Washington, D.C. police officer who was running a child prostitution business involving underage girls that he was basically pimping out of his own home. And this is hardly a new thing. Apparently, a while back, another officer, Mark Washington, was arrested for producing child pornography, for taking nude pictures of a 15-year-old girl and doing whatever he was doing with them. So this idea that we're getting from the gun grabbers that we should surrender all of our weapons and rely on the police to take care of us, they got to be on SSRIs. They really are. Interesting little article over at care2.com commenting on the fact that Congress got 239 days off this year, and asking how many did you get, and of course the answer for some 100 million Americans is 365. Now we know on the days when members of Congress are away from their offices, they're out on these little trips to Israel, or they're being out on these junkets or fact-finding trips, they're being wined and dined and feted by large corporation lobbyists. And it really is just a huge, huge racket over there. Now getting on to the NSA, pardon me, President Obama has come out to reassure us that the NSA, really, they've learned their lesson, and they're not spying on ordinary law-abiding Americans, absolutely, and we know that's complete nonsense, because we proved with our 4 NSA challenges that real criminals and real terrorists can secure their communications against the National Security Agency by simply crafting their own code methods, by not using the approved, standardized, off-the-shelf codes where the NSA already knows the method. In my most recent challenge, I gave them a method because it's a method that's designed to make brute force determination of the key too costly to use on ordinary citizens not actually suspected of a crime here. But they're trying to reassure us everything's going to be fine, and apparently there is a new bill being introduced into Congress with over 100 bipartisan co-sponsors to basically say the NSA is not allowed to spy on ordinary citizens not suspected of a crime any longer. Huzzah, huzzah, huzzah. And I think anybody who thinks this is going to change anything is delusional. The goal of all this is not to get the NSA back under control, but to sell you the idea that the NSA isn't watching you any longer, and therefore you should stop taking precautions to secure your private data from the NSA. Because after all, the NSA and Echelon have been breaking the laws to spy on you since the 1980s. Do you think they will stop now because Congress tells them to? Of course they won't. If the NSA actually thought this bill was going to be a threat to their power, those co-sponsors would be getting phone calls late at night, playing recordings of their own phone calls to Fifi's phone fantasies or something. The only real solution to guard and protect the privacy of the American people and the rest of planet Earth is to completely scrap all the data centers, sell the equipment as surplus, take those responsible, tar, feather, hang, draw, quarter, burn, and have the ashes peed on by a rabid wombat. Anything less is not going to change anything at all. We're going to go to the phones here. Ralph in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Just calling when you were talking about Pearl Harbor. I don't know if you stated why FDR wanted us to go to war. Is it basically to stimulate the economy?
Not so much stimulate the economy, but the reason everybody was so upset with Germany is that they had kicked out the private central bank imposed on them by the Treaty of Versailles at the end of World War I. Had led to that runaway inflation where it took an entire basket of notes to buy a loaf of bread. And they instituted a value-based currency. And they went back to the model that the U.S. had had after we kicked out the British, which is the government created the currency, spent it into circulation to obtain what the government needed. It flowed through commerce, supporting commerce without accruing any debt or interest, and then was taxed back at the same amount at the end of the cycle to balance the books. And that, of course, was a tremendous threat to the Bank of England, the Federal Reserve, all of these private central banks that had hijacked control of the nation's currencies, because a nation operating with a government value-based currency, a nation operating the public currency as a public utility, becomes an economic powerhouse. And that's exactly what happened in Germany. They pulled out of the Weimar inflation and rebuilt their manufacturing in record time. They were calling it the German miracle. And this was an economic, manufacturing, mercantile threat that the rest of Europe, enslaved to private central banks, couldn't compete with. So they had to find some way to smash it. Over at my website, up at the top, little permanent index under the title bar, there's an article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars. And you need to read that to understand the real cause of all these wars and assassinations that have dominated our history, and understand that what we're going into now with Russia and China is just the latest chapter in this horror tale that we have all been forced to live in.
Okay, so basically FDR was part of the plot to say, okay, in order to get Germany, which the bankers wanted, they needed America to be a part.
They absolutely needed America to be a part, and America had actually been a part of World War II before Pearl Harbor, because there was the Lend-Lease program, there was all kinds of weapons and supplies and ammunition the United States was sending to Britain, which technically was an act of war against Germany. But Roosevelt absolutely wanted to get into the war against Germany. He even sent U.S. warships to fire on German warships in the North Atlantic, and Hitler was wise enough not to respond to the provocation, because Hitler understood if the U.S. came in with its manufacturing might, it was going to drastically change the outcome of the war.
All right, well, thank you, sir.
All right, you're welcome. Now, getting back to the White House, Obama apparently has been caught in yet another prevarication in which he denied knowing this uncle of his from Kenya who has a criminal background. And now he's had to come out and acknowledge that, yes, he actually lived with that uncle for a brief time back in the 1980s while preparing to attend Harvard Law School. And the White House is saying this is not an admission of lying. It's just a clarification of what we said before. That's the Washington term of craft, when they've been caught in a lie and they have to tell you what's going on or come up with a new lie. This is merely a clarification, even when it turns out to be a complete 180-degree reversal. So the man is as much a sociopathic liar as Bill Clinton was. Remember when Bill Clinton was telling everybody he was off of junk food, he was eating healthy, and all America should do the same, and then we caught him here on the island of Oahu walking out of a McDonald's. These people lie about everything, even inconsequential things. I don't care who Obama lived with when he was going to go to Harvard, and I don't care if Bill Clinton had a Big Mac. Every once in a while I have one. It's not a big deal. But they're so used to running their lives on the basis of lies to the people, they lie about trivial things. If they ever caught themselves telling the truth, they'd have to tell a lie just to stay in practice. On a more serious note, if they start telling the truth, people are going to learn to pick up on those subtle little physical cues between when they're telling the truth and telling the lie. But if you're looking at a politician and they're always lying, they always look the same. And you can't say, ooh, he's acting different this time from when he was telling something I knew to be the truth. So it's all lies and illusions here. Down in Arkansas, Democrat Mark Pryor is saying the Bible and not partisanship should guide politics, and he's assuring his Bible Belt voters that his faith will guide him in his office. Now, that's kind of interesting because the first 9 chapters of Leviticus involve detailed instructions for sacrificing live animals to God. So I figure it's got to be getting awfully messy and smelly around Mark's office by now. Going to take a break for Phyllis Schlafly and news. Claire will be joining us after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here at the third hour. And joining us for the first part of the hour, Claire. Yes, Claire is sitting back there. But before we do that, I'd like to bring on John Stadmiller, our boss of all bosses, and Sandra to follow up on my little letter to Santa Claus that I was mentioning earlier in the show. So, John, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, how you doing, Michael?
I'm doing just fine. Aloha, Nui Nui.
You've got Claire in the corner?
Yes, Claire's back here, and
Claire, where are you?
I'm just sitting right behind where Michael is.
Well, I figured if I brought my wife on.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right.
Let me first question. How's the weather in Hawaii right now?
Oh, it's lovely.
It's lovely. It's 81.5 degrees, 50% humidity, and eat your hearts out.
Oh, my God. We are, because it's about 32 degrees here in central Texas. And I'll tell you what, I've been down here too long because my blood is thinner than water. I mean, this cold will go, we got like 20, 25-mile-an-hour winds.
Oh, dear.
The wind chill will do that. I mean, it would only be worse in Montana. They're like minus 16, minus 17 right now, according to Fox News.
Well, see, they're northerners. Down here, 32 degrees is 16 below zero.
Yeah. Well, look at us people here in Hawaii. If we were to come there and it's 32 degrees, we'd be bundled up looking like Eskimos.
Oh, I know, and I want to share the pain with you. That's why I need you and Claire to move stateside. You see. So, I mean, we'll get you here in Texas, and
we're gonna need a little help because otherwise we're gonna have to walk, and that's take one step and come up for air, and take one step and come up for air, and and
not a good idea.
Trying to get the computers and the harp and everything there without them soaking up the water is going to be a problem, and all the radioactivity is going to be a problem.
I'm telling you, I want to get you guys out of there before you start glowing in the middle of the night. You know,
oh my goodness.
Horrible stuff. And I heard that you guys have a big junk pile that's going to the north of you, heading east.
Yeah, it is. It's missing us, but it's a huge accumulation of debris in the ocean. A lot of it is from Japan. We've actually had some debris wash up on the beaches here. I have a little piece of it in the world-famous What Really Happened debris collection. But it is a real problem. The pollution is catching up with everybody, and now, of course, it's so toxic and dangerous. Now they're going to dump all of the accumulated radioactive cooling water from Fukushima in the ocean and say, it's no big deal. It'll be diluted by the time it gets down to you.
That's not a good idea. But you know what else are you going to do? If we haven't noticed, every one of these nuclear power plants they always put near a body of water, and there's a good reason. It goes critical. They got to cool it down. But what do they do?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, but what do they do with the contaminated water once it gets contaminated?
They get their revenge on the United States for Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
That, I don't know about that. That sounds like a conspiracy theory to me, but it might fit. I don't know.
Oh, my goodness. I think we need a nuke alert in your back pocket.
Something.
Well, you guys I think you sell that in the RBN store, and I have one. I got one actually right after the Fukushima meltdown, and it's still working fine. The battery is still good, and We have it hanging over our bedroom door.
Yeah, you can hear it chirp. You know it's working.
That's right.
In place of mistletoe, you got a nuke alert? Okay, then.
Yes, in the event of a mushroom cloud, you kiss.
Okay, I'll leave that right where it's laying. Hey, look, guys, it's been a crazy month. I know you guys have been real busy. I know, Michael, you got caught up in a lot of stuff for Claire and producing stuff and all that, and we're back into the swing of things here on the network. Going into next year, I'm going to put a little request because you have this on your website, okay? We have not ramped up to do this yet, but you have asked people, hey, if you listen to my show, contact your local radio station and get my show on the air. And there is probably no better program on this network to really get behind and push than whatreallyhappened.com. You're the best prepared host on this network, and I don't know how the heck you do it. I've listened to your show many times. You don't stumble. You don't repeat yourself. I mean, you just let it flow. It comes out of you naturally.
Well, a lot of coffee goes into that, and but see, here's the thing. Everybody listening to this show, they already know what we're talking about, and now's the time when we have to reach out to other radio audiences that don't have all this information. And really bring them in and bring in new affiliates and go to boldly go where no broadcaster has gone before. And that's where we really need the help of all the listeners.
Well, and think about this, folks. I want you to consider this for a moment. Michael, how many radio stations do you think somebody like Sean Hannity is on?
It's a huge number, and I really don't know. I mean, people like Rush Limbaugh, they have these vast networks that are out there and just putting them out there. And again, we're sort of not welcome into those corporatized radio networks, so we have to build our own. And of course, that means spending our own money to have the satellite link, and then having to basically do that outreach to radio stations across the country that are looking for programming and saying, hey, you need to check this out.
Right. Yeah. We put up XDS, and a lot of people don't understand what XDS is, and that is the old ABC Star Guide. And when we picked up Larry Pratt's program and Bill Frady, that's sponsored by Gun Owners of America, Bill Frady's on Monday through Friday for 3 hours, 7 to 10 Central Time, 7 to 10 a.m. Central Time. Larry Pratt's just on 1 hour on Saturdays. But what happened, because they were on USA Network, when they were over and done with them, affiliates out there still wanted to program. We didn't even do any affiliate relations, and we picked up 55 radio stations just by the radio stations calling us. And what we need to do here is we need to ramp up. We need to put in our own affiliate relations department. And the reason, Michael, I said what I said about your program is because you can talk about some of the most vile and disgusting things in ways that I cannot. If it's against the human spirit and the conscience and morality of man, you have such a way of talking about it where it's really not offensive. Where I come along, I'm kind of like the bull in the china shop, kind of approach to things. But what I'm trying to say here is you're marketable, but we need to let the radio stations know that Mike Rivero, What Really Happened, is available. Now, you've had your website, 18, 20 years now?
It'll be 20 years this next March.
Well, and you've built a solid base of people out there, and you've kept a lot of people informed. Now, the people in mainstream, they're trying, bless their little hearts, they're trying to sound somewhat conservative. They're trying to sound somewhat obvious. And, what we all know, what we've talked about over the years, and they're trying to do it within that corporate entity. Well, sometimes that doesn't work too well, but there are independent station owners and managers out there that will pick up the programming. And I'd like to see Michael Rivero at a minimum on 100, 150, 200 radio stations. I think that's possible. But we don't have the department, the affiliate relations department, to do that. And I just wanted you to understand and your listeners to understand, because I think I told you that at one time, Michael, and I thought maybe you might have taken that as a little bit of slight somebody else's programming is getting precedence over you. That's not the case.
No, that was never the issue. But I understand. I think our listeners understand. To build an affiliate network to help reach more people, to get the information out so Americans can make good choices, it's going to have to be a grassroots effort. Specifically because the corporate media is trying to play catch-up with the independent media. We already have a majority of the audience on our websites and our broadcasts. They're trying to say, well, we're starting to talk about these conspiracy theories too, but they won't go far enough. But it has to be grassroots, and we need your help to call your local radio stations constantly, just harangue them and say, you need to get the RBN programming on your show. And it's not like it's going to cost you a lot of money or anything. You just have to say yes, and you already have the XDS receiver. We've got to take a break here. We'll be back with John and Sandra after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, welcome back to our show. We're talking with John and Sandra, and we're putting out a call to Rivero's Rangers. Now is the time to really push to get the word out about Republic Broadcasting, to try and get more radio stations to carry our programming, to really get the word out to the American people of just how close we are to this situation spinning out of control into an outright nuclear war. So, John, take it away.
I was just going to say that the Rangers, I think you just called them?
Rivero's Rangers, yes. We're going to have badges and patches made up here at some point.
Cool. I want a shiny badge and a gun, too.
You get the badge. We're not handing out guns.
Okay, sorry. Well, down in Columbus, the Rangers already did this. About 15 of them went to WAIS 770 AM down in Columbus, Ohio, and said, would you please put this guy on? So that's exactly what they're doing. They're wrapping up programming from another network, and they're canceling them, and they're putting you on.
Oh, wow. There's a Christmas present.
Yes. I'm telling you. Yeah. I mean, and folks, seriously, you don't have to be harassing. You can do it in a very kind way. Just remind the station owner or manager that we're in a lurch, and we are not corporatized or bought off. We will get up there, and we will give the truth to people if they can handle it.
And we will support your local station.
Yes.
Get the word out about you.
Yeah, and this is the most important thing to radio stations. A lot of these guys are going dark. There's no money out there. The Double Plus Good, congratulations, you've got more Choco rations coming this week. People out of D.C., they just said today that, hey, happy times are here again. The unemployment rate's down to 7%. And I'm thinking, man, if that's the case, then there's a lot of people doing business out there. Yeah. But that's another lie. If the government's moving its lips, it's lying to you.
That's true.
So, yeah, we need to get our programming on more and more stations. And just to give you a heads up, the reason I mentioned Sean Hannity, he's got 500 stations. Mark Levin, he's out of New York. He's got more stations than that. He's an attorney, talk show host. He's the one that started this thing about, well, we need 11 new amendments to the Constitution. And he started this whole deal, and Sean Hannity and the Rush Limbaughs of the world, they all on top of this thing. And I smelled a rat. Here's the case. If we can't get the politicians in Washington, D.C. to pay attention to the Constitution and the amendments that are already there, what good is it going to be to add 11 more to the pile that they're ignoring? This is the solution of conservative radio in this country today.
Well,
and that is...
sorry to interrupt. It's kind of what we see in Washington, D.C. every time some Wall Street firm breaks the law or some politician's caught in corruption. They don't fix the problem. They just say, we need a new law. And they forget there are already laws that were there. And they think passing a new law or creating a new amendment is going to convince us all that things are getting better. And we know that is simply not the case.
It is not. And something else we're doing here, it's the end of the year. Ho, 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 ho. I'd much rather be in Hawaii with 80-degree temperatures and 50% humidity. Broke down there than broke here. But end-of-year pledge drive. My dear wife came in here. Michael, does your wife do the bills around the house?
She does the home finances, and I run the books for the business side, and we don't cross over into each other's line, which is why we just celebrated a very happy 20th anniversary.
Yes.
Well, congratulations.
Mm-hmm. Congratulations.
I'm only on 15 years, and we're still both alive, right? Yeah. Yeah, and she came in to look at the books here at the network today. She's the one who handles the finances at home as well. But she came in and said, look, you're in the hole. You've got bills that you've got to pay here. And I'm going, yeah, okay. What do you have in mind? Well, in order to catch up here at the end of the year, and just to give you a little hint, if I saw Amy Goodman today on Democracy Now!, and she was touting the fact, make a donation for $2,000 and I'll come and have dinner with you. And I'm
John,
like,
can I put you out there?
What,
they'd have to pay me $2,000 to have dinner with Amy Goodman. I'm sorry.
I'm telling you. And am I not fat enough, honey? Geez, I quit smoking after 45 years, and automatically I gained 30 pounds just like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could put the red and white suit on me, and I really would look like Santa Claus.
Oh, you're not that bad.
Well, I feel that bad.
Well. And
you snicker at me at night. It's not helping, at any rate.
Now, the radio audience doesn't need to hear that part of it, okay?
That is absolutely true.
Too much information.
Back to the subject at hand. We're short this year, after all said and done, $18,274.41.
Well,
now, I got the 41 cents.
Call it 20,000. Just round it off, because
okay.
the next bill's going to be coming in.
Oh, it's on its way.
Mm-hmm.
I guarantee you. At any rate, what we want to do with the listeners to your program and to the listeners of RBN is do the same thing that we did before with the T-shirt and the coffee mug. So if you want to call into the network at 800-724-2719 and make a donation, make a pledge, we would greatly appreciate it. We're rebuilding this network. We've shifted to formats. I think many people have noticed. There's programs we've added, and there's some that we've deleted, and some that have gone to the weekend. Well, the lineup is being done so we can get on radio stations out there. Now, we have no illusions here. I know that we're not going to be on all the stations in this country, although I wished we were, and maybe one day, if we keep doing the right thing, we will be. Osmotically or something, they'll just pick us up. I don't know. But I do know that we have to add more personnel to the network to do the job a network should be doing for its host and, more importantly, for the listeners. I'm not doing this. They've said years ago, if you want to make any money, don't go into radio. They weren't lying. Trust me, they weren't lying. But it's doubly difficult to do programming in a network like we're doing when we're actually up on the air telling the people the truth. Makes it a little bit harder, but here's the good part to that. People are starting to figure out how they've been lied to, how they've been zoomed after dark, and they're now starting to turn more and more, as you said, Michael, to that alternative media. Well, I don't want to be the alternative. I want to be the alternative to what they have constructed, which is not very good. So we need your help, folks. We need some donations here to clear up the bills for this year. Next year, we're going to hit full tilt boogie. We have some other commercial enterprises that we're looking at. And, Michael, I wasn't kidding about you leaving Hawaii. If this thing goes through, you and Claire, you're coming back stateside.
Well, we're going to be having a heck of a yard sale then. Folks, this is the Christmas season here. Just think of it as adding one more name to that Christmas gift list that you have out there, writing a check to RBN instead of buying us a subscription to the Jam of the Month Club or something silly like that. So just in the spirit of holiday giving, because the good that is going to come from your support to RBN in this very dangerous, trying time. I mean, we've got F-18s following Santa Claus around now. We can't allow that to stand. So anything you can send in, silver, gold, old appliances, unused children, just go ahead and send them on in.
Well, and they can go to the website, republicbroadcasting.org, and at the top of the page, the red banner at the top, they can hit donations. They can do it by PayPal, or they can just mail us a check or a money order, or FRNs wrapped in foil. We don't care. And the only reason the aluminum foil is there, not to put it on your head, but to keep the prying eyes at the postal workers out of that envelope around the holidays. But simply send it to RBN at 2251 Double Creek, Drive, Suite 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664, or give us a call right now. We got operators standing by at 800-724-2719. And Merry Christmas to you guys. Thank you so much, Michael and Claire.
All right, Merry Christmas, and we'll be back after these few commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're going to take a quick phone call here. John in New York. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Brother Mike, glad to have you back at RBN, man.
Oh, thank you.
What's on my mind? You know, yeah, you're the best, Mike, and you're sorely missed when for a few weeks you were gone or whatever. But listen, brother, I want to talk a little bit about Israel and what they're doing over with the how do you pronounce it? The Bedouin?
The Bedouin
people or whatever.
Yes.
I mean, is this racism? I know they broke down apartheid over in South Africa, but you know, what about the apartheid in Israel, Michael? Could you elaborate, please, for me?
Well, I think there's no question that we're looking at an apartheid state. Even Nelson Mandela, before he passed away, was saying that Israel is more apartheid than even South Africa had been. There are blatant, overt, racially based laws. The color of the license plate on your car is based on whether you're Jewish or Muslim, and the Bedouins are basically being treated not as humans worthy of respect, but simply as these things that need to be gotten out of this area where they want to build Jewish-only settlements. So there's no question Israel is an apartheid state.
No doubt, Michael. And, you know, like what George Washington said, you cannot, you know, have this favoritism towards another nation like we have towards Israel, you know, because it produces a variety of evils.
That's right. Washington, on his farewell address, he said, beware of foreign entanglements, and that certainly applies to all the harm that's been caused to the United States of America by this entanglement between our government and the government of Israel. And it's almost embarrassing and humiliating to see our elected leaders who are paid with our tax money just constantly groveling and bowing toward Tel Aviv.
You know, bowing, I don't know if that's a big enough word, man, but they're certainly, whatever they're doing, I mean, it's just ridiculous because that's where their money comes from. You know, whether it's Schmucky Schumer, the guy over here in New York that represents not me, but the friggin' AIPAC lobby, or Blumenthal, I don't know what the hell state he's from, but, you know, it's unconscionable, Michael. But thank God we have some truth tellers like Michael Rivero and, you know, shedding light and doing great work.
All right, well, thank you very much for those kind words. We're going to let you go now, and we're going to turn the microphone back over to the lady, Claire, who's been waiting patiently to talk about
China. I have noticed with some alarm that VP Biden said today that Washington does not accept China's new air defense zone over disputed islands in the East China Sea. And the statement was, I was absolutely clear on behalf of my president. We do not recognize the zone. It will have no effect on American operations, zero, none. So it looks as though we are being groomed, if you will, to go to war against China to stop the march of the yuan, because so many countries now are accepting that and not even going to the dollar anymore in their transactions, like Australia and New Zealand.
Now, let me put this into a historical context to realize why this is so dangerous. Remember the Cuban Missile Crisis? The United States declared an exclusion zone around Cuba, even though Cuba is not technically part of the United States of America. What would have happened if Russia had taken Biden's approach? We don't recognize your exclusion zone, and we're going to go on sending these rockets to Cuba. We would have wound up in a nuclear war, and we are risking one right now.
And the problem is, and it's something I would like to hope that those precious few adults in the bowels of power in D.C. understand, we do not have the troop strength, we do not have the money, and we do not have the manufacturing to be able to guarantee a successful outcome of a conventional war. And, Mike, that is what makes this so scarily dangerous to me.
It is very dangerous.
Yeah.
Other nations don't want to loan us any more money to buy weapons. We don't have the money to buy decent weapons from other countries. The weapons our industry are producing are defective, botched up. They're just over-bloated with gadgets and featureism, and they're kludgy, to use the technician's term on it.
Yeah.
We've seen that time and again with these weapons that simply don't do what they're supposed to do, whether it's the Bradley Infantry Fighting Vehicle, the F-22, the F-35, the Littoral Combat Ships. We know there's a high failure rate of these drones that are on their way into Pakistan and Yemen to kill innocent people, a lot of them never make it back out. Not because they're shot down, they simply malfunction and fall out of the sky.
Yeah, I would like to hope that more sane heads will prevail. It's really unfortunate that the UN does not have a binding arbitration clause in its makeup for naval disputes over naval territory. It would be nice if China, Japan, and all of the other countries which have claims to some of these disputed islands, primarily because of the oil and natural gas under them, would have to sit at a table, check their testosterone at the door, and come to a reasonable good faith agreement where none of these countries lose face.
Well, see, that's the real crime of going on here, because back in 2008, they were negotiating to share the resources, share the costs of development, and then the U.S. gets in there and starts meddling and saying to Japan, they're all yours, you shouldn't talk to these other countries, because, again, the real goal is not the Sakhalin Islands, the real goal is not the oil and gas, that's sort of a side effect, a side benefit. Right now, the United States is unable to conquer nations that turn away from the dollar and turn towards the yuan and the renminbi as fast as they're fleeing away from the dollar. And so I think what's going on is the U.S. has decided to just go to the head of the problem, and we're seeing this saber rattling, and we're seeing this constant China bashing in the media. They're getting ready to try and provoke China into some kind of a military confrontation with the United States, blame it on China, and start World War III for real, the way Franklin Roosevelt goaded Japan into the attack on Pearl Harbor, then said, oh my goodness, it's a surprise attack, those dastardly Japanese, and got us into World War II. And World War II ended with the use of nuclear weapons on civilian populations. World War III will probably start with nuclear weapons on civilian populations. We're going to grab a quick phone call here. George in Texas, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
John forgot one thing when he was talking about F-14s falling around Santa Claus. When Santa Claus enters into U.S. airspace, don't be surprised if Santa has to stop at TSA checkpoints. And Christmas is canceled forever because the TSA confiscated all the Christmas gifts.
Oh, well, listen, he's wearing a red suit. That makes him a commie, and he's got a beard. They'll waterboard him. They'll absolutely waterboard him. But listen, I wouldn't worry about those F-18s following Santa, because for Santa to be able to hit all of the homes in the Christian world in 24 hours, he's obviously flying a lot faster than those F-18s can keep up with.
Yeah, he probably got a sled from Area 51.
Probably.
Thank you, Mike. Have a good weekend.
What's next on your list there, Claire?
This is a very sad and kind of dark tale, cautionary tale, if you will. But I think it's one that all the parents who listen to us need to hear. There has been a recently published study for the Federal Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and it indicated that an astounding 20+% of all 14-year-olds have been diagnosed at one time or the other with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, and the condition is treated with some very dangerous medications. Also,
here's the joke. The guy who invented that term, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which when I was a kid was called teachers boring me, admitted shortly before he died, they just made this up in order to have a hook with which to sell medication to your children that they don't really need. There is no pill in the world that you can give to a kid that is going to make a dull, boring teacher seem suddenly fascinating.
Absolutely. And if you or any friends or families are being pressured to put their child on medication for this imaginary condition, I'd like you to share the following, which is also up at the website. There was a kid, 11-ish, 12-ish, and he was being evaluated by his school, and the school officials said, well, the kid's got ADHD. The school social worker kept calling them in for meetings, and one morning, before the meeting had started regarding their son, they were threatened that if they did not put their child on medication, that social services was going to grab them. Well, any parent would be concerned about that. And they didn't want to lose their kids. And the social worker said that the Ritalin that the kid was going to be put on was very mild, and would stimulate the brain cell and help Matthew focus. What was never stated was that Ritalin overstimulates the heart. They lost their child to heart disease because they were never told that there has to be heart monitoring going on when a kid is taking Ritalin to prevent them dying of heart disease. And
yeah,
so,
but the pharmaceutical companies made their stockholders happy, and that's really all that really matters on this thing.
No.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but we're at another commercial break.
I hear you.
And we're going to have to take a pause here. Yep. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back. Last segment of the show. We're going to be rushing. We got a lot of stuff to fit in. Apparently, AT&T is now saying it doesn't have to disclose its arrangements with the National Security Agency. Time to move over to Sprint. Had somebody called in off the air asking about the scientist who had come up with the name attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and then just before he died said, yeah, it's a fictitious disease. We made it up to sell pills. His name was Leon Eisenberg, and I just posted a link to the story about that to whatreallyhappened.com. Take it away, Claire.
Okay. This last week, Dianne Feinstein and Mike Rogers were being interviewed by Candy Crowley. And Crowley pitched them the softball, are we safer now than we were a year ago, 2 years ago? And both of them said, oh, no, there's a lot more terrorism going on in the last 2 years. And guys...
Does that mean the entire Department of Homeland Security is an utter failure and a waste of taxpayer money?
Completely impotent.
I'm shocked.
And, you know, if there is a rise, it is a direct result of U.S. foreign policy decisions. Now, this is not terrorism. This is scarerism.
Absolutely, and I'm concerned as we head into the Christmas season, or even tomorrow, Pearl Harbor Day. They may be planning another one of these false flags, even though they were hideously embarrassed by that Boston bombing and how quickly that official story fell apart. And by the way, there's evidence in the recently released Newtown shooting tapes that that was all fake. That's also on the front page of whatreallyhappened.com.
And the easiest way to stop any terrorism against the U.S. or its assets is to stop mucking about in other people's countries, expropriating resources to which the U.S. government has no moral right, Mike.
Okay, and that was mucking with an M,
mucking,
for those of you on cheap radios.
Yes.
But you're absolutely right. The U.S. Is basically engaged in conquering other people's wealth to try and prop up this pyramid scheme. Bank, the people are fighting back, and the U.S. says, oh, it's terrorism. They're not allowed to fight back because we're the United States and we're doing good things.
Yeah, and I am very concerned about a possible false flag in the not-too-distant future, because nothing else that they've done has worked.
Well, neither will a false flag, but they're desperate enough to take that gamble. Do you have anything else real quick here before we wrap up the show?
I think that was it.
That was it.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I'm sorry you didn't get the entire hour, but you'll be back next week anyway. All right. We're going to pull down Claire's microphone. I got a couple of things I want to share with you. As you're probably already aware, behind all the brouhaha about the Obamacare website, where the front end is sort of kind of maybe working and the back end is still completely misassigning everybody's insurance information, Congress is already back screaming at each other over the budget deal, by which they mean, are they going to raise taxes? Are they going to raise the debt ceiling? Are they going to do both? And the corporate media is framing this entire discussion in terms of, should we raise the debt ceiling or should we not raise the debt ceiling? And that is not really the question that you, the American people, need to be asking. And just as we're asking you to go out and call all your local radio stations and carry our RBN programming, I am asking you to call your friends, email your friends, post on your social networks this article I've got on the front page of whatreallyhappened.com, the real question about the debt ceiling, which is the Constitution of the United States of America authorizes this government to create and issue and spend into circulation interest-free, debt-free currency with which to buy what the government needs, flow through society and commerce without accruing any interest, then is taxed back by the same amount at the end to balance the books and close the cycle. That's the economy this nation was started with. It's the economy that worked for the American people. So why, if the Constitution authorized the government to create its own currency and spend it in circulation interest-free, does our government persist in going to a privately owned central bank to borrow currency that's just as instantly created out of thin air at interest, thereby condemning the American people and future generations to debt servitude to these unelected private bankers. Why are they doing that? And we have to ask that question, because corporate media will never dare ask that question. And the government can't answer that question, because the only answer they have is, well, 100 years ago, this corrupted Congress and this corrupted president said, yeah, give us some money now and we will sell the entire population of the United States of America, including their future generations, into your slavery. And that is exactly what happened. There shouldn't be a debt ceiling issue. This government should not be going to private central bankers to borrow ink and paper and numbers in a computer at interest. It's not the way the nation was started. And if you go back and you read my article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, you will learn the entire history of the United States, wars, assassinations, all of it, really comes down to a war between these private central bankers trying to keep their little scam economy going versus presidents and people who are standing up and saying we need to return to an honest monetary system. Because we don't have one. We are enslaved to the very system of banking we fought the American Revolution to be free of. So don't get caught up in this, should we raise the debt ceiling or should we not raise the debt ceiling false dichotomy that the corporate media is putting out there. The real question is, why are we in debt to a private central bank when the government is authorized to create and issue its own value-based, debt-free money? And they don't want you asking that question, and that's why it's so important that you get that article off my website, and you send it to all your friends, you post it to all your social media, you drive this thing into being viral. Because unless and until we end that private central banking scam, we will never, and our children will never be free of debt slavery. That's what it's about. It's the new form of slavery. It's the new form of serfdom and feudalism. It's fascism. To construct a society so that we are always at the beck and call of the bankers, that we cannot conduct our lives or our business without their leave. Because that is not what America is supposed to be. Now, we're only a few minutes away from the program, and I do want to go back. And like I said earlier in the show, it's Christmas time. I know you're making up a list of Christmas gifts and Christmas presents to people, and I just want you to add RBN onto the bottom of that list for a little tiny Christmas gift. And it will help us get the word out during these dark times, because we're not getting any funding from large corporations or government agencies or any of that. When you see these so-called independent media outlets and they've got $5-10 million grants coming in, you know that's the end of their independence. They're now dependent on that person who signs the check for the $5 or $10 million. And we don't do that. Our support comes from you, which means we are answerable and responsible only to you, the American people. So, 800-724-2719, 800-724-2719. That number again is 800-724-2719. Please call in. If you pledge $100 or more, you get an RBN T-shirt, an RBN coffee mug, and bragging rights that you are standing up for the independent media, informing the American people so they can make good choices. And Thomas Jefferson would be proud of you. I'll be proud of you. John will be proud of you. And in general, you will do a great deal of good. We don't need the magazine subscription or the Jam of the Month Club or anything like that. We need your financial support to grow RBN and to start reaching out to more affiliates so that those Americans who don't already know what you know will be able to learn what's really going on, what the real agenda is behind all these wars. Because if we lose this, if they get their war going, it's going to murder 1 billion people across the globe. And whoever's left alive will be enslaved to the banks paying off the war debt for the next 100 years afterwards. That's how important this is right now. And it's up to you. It's up to you. We really do need your help. And I hate asking. I'm bad about this kind of thing. I don't like to do it because I know those of you listening to this show, you're in as serious financial straits as we are. But we'll have donations come in just, pennies, because it's all they've got. But we understand how much that means. So thank you for your support. Have a really good weekend. We're going to be back here on RBN on Monday. So until then, stay safe, stay angry, stay skeptical, stay informed, make good choices. Hit that donate button over at RBN. Don't forget, if you're buying silver and gold as Christmas presents, to go to the Republic Trading Group, because part of those proceeds also go to fund our operation to get the truth out. Have a good weekend. Aloha, America.